It's been 6 months since I moved to Oregon and not a single call, text, or email from my parents. Not a question about where I'd gone, or why my apartment lease ended, or why the birthday card they mailed never reached me. Not that they remembered my birthday anyway. I still remember that last day in Arlington. The sun was unseasonably hot for March, and sweat trickled down my back as I taped the final boxes shut. Jasper hoisted a crate of kitchen supplies with a grunt, while Ray folded down the flaps on my suitcase with her knee. My one-bedroom apartment was mostly empty by then, just stacks of cardboard and the second-hand armchair I didn't bother to sell. "Are you sure you're not going to tell them?" Ray asked, wiping her forehead with the sleeve of her hoodie. "I mean, just a text or something I looked up from where I was labeling a box bedroom. Donate. They haven't asked where I live in 3 years. Why would I tell them I'm leaving?" She didn't argue. She just exchanged a look with Jasper, who muttered, "Still wild to me." It wasn't wild to me. It was normal. Expected. I'd been the extra in their family portrait for as long as I could remember. Quiet, invisible, acceptable only when useful. Callum was the sun. The center. The reason the camera flashed. I was background. The U-Haul we'd rented creaked as we loaded in the final box. I shut the door with both hands, pressed my palms against the metal until it clicked. Then I stood there for a moment, staring at the place I'd called home for almost a decade. Not because it held memories, but because it held silence. "Ready?" Jasper asked, swinging the keys around his finger. I nodded. More than ready. The drive to Ashland was long and quiet. I watched the landscape shift outside the window from city grit to redwoods, from crowded to clear. By the time we hit Oregon, something in me had already begun to loosen. My new apartment was nothing special. One bedroom, slightly outdated kitchen, a narrow balcony overlooking the trees, but it was mine. Mine in a way nothing else had ever been. I hung my own photos, set up my desk exactly the way I liked it, cooked real dinners without anyone interrupting or ignoring me. I got up early, logged into work, watered the herbs in the kitchen window. Jasper and Ray visited every other weekend. Edith, my grandmother, called every week without fail. No one else called. That was the part that made me laugh some nights, not bitter laughter, but the kind that sounds hollow in an empty room. I had vanished, and no one even blinked. Not until last week. When the phone rang and the name lit up, I didn't answer right away. I just stared at it. Theodore Rhodes, like it belonged to a different life. I picked up on the fourth ring. His voice came through, clipped, irritated. "You need to come home next weekend." I should have known what that call meant. The flatness in his tone wasn't disappointment or confusion, it was entitlement. I was being summoned. And not for my sake. I didn't ask for details. I told him I had plans and hung up before he could begin his usual follow-up lecture. Then I sat back at my desk, stared out at the pine-covered ridge behind my apartment, and felt that old weight settle over me. Not sadness, just recognition. This was how it had always been. When I was 8, I made honor roll for the 3rd time in a row. I laid the report card neatly on the kitchen table, where I knew my mother would sit down with her tea. She glanced at it once and said, "Good job, honey," without looking up from her phone. That same week, Callum got a C+ on a math quiz and still got to pick dinner. The year I won first place in the regional science fair, I came home holding a trophy half my height. My teacher had pulled me aside that morning and said I should be proud. I was. I wanted them to be too. At dinner, I placed the trophy on the counter. My father said, "Let's not make a big deal out of it, Delaney. Your brother has finals." That was the year I stopped bringing awards home. By the time I turned 17, I knew I'd be paying for college myself. I got into a state school with a scholarship, picked up 2 part-time jobs, and stopped coming home for breaks. It was easier that way. Cleaner. I graduated early, moved into a shared apartment, took whatever freelance work I could find. My resume grew faster than my social life, but I didn't mind. Work was something I could control. Work didn't forget me at the dinner table. Eventually, I landed a job with a cybersecurity firm based in Seattle. Remote, flexible hours, full benefits. I'd been there almost 3 years now. My boss said I had a knack for untangling the chaos that other engineers overlooked. My savings account had commas in it. My fridge had real food. My inbox had a pre-approval letter from a mortgage broker. I was 29 years old and finally thinking about buying a house. Nothing big, just mine. So when my father's voice tried to pull me back into obligation, into performances dressed as family duties, I didn't flinch. I just let the silence stretch long enough to make it clear I wasn't coming. You need to come home next weekend. That was the first thing he said. Not hello, not how have you been. Just a directive delivered like I was still 18 and waiting for permission to breathe. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Why? There was a pause. I could practically hear him rolling his eyes through the phone. Your brother's engagement dinner. Isla's parents want to meet the whole family. They're very traditional. Of course. Not a reunion, not a reconnection. Just another image to maintain. A daughter-shaped placeholder at the table to round out the illusion of family. I won't be there. Another pause. Sharper this time. What do you mean you won't be there? I mean exactly that, I said. I have other plans. Delaney, this is important for your brother's future. They're high-profile people. It'll reflect badly on us if you don't show up. There it was. Us. Not me. Not how I was doing or where I'd been. Just the optics. I moved to Oregon 6 months ago. I said, my voice steady. I'm not flying across the country for a dinner I wasn't even invited to until now. Silence. The kind that isn't quiet at all, but charged like air before a storm. You moved to Oregon without telling us you didn't know where I was before. Why would this be different? His voice dropped low and tight. How dare you move without telling your family? What's your address? I almost laughed. Do you even remember my last one? He didn't answer right away. And that told me everything. That's not the point. It's exactly the point I said. You're not asking because you care. You're asking because now it's inconvenient not to know. Delaney, this isn't how families work. No, I said, but it's how ours always has. I hung up. My hand didn't even shake. For a moment, I just sat there letting the silence rush back in. Then the screen lit up again. Missed call. Then another. Then a text. From him. From my mother. Then Callum. I didn't answer any of them. I just turned off my phone, made myself tea, and stood on the balcony watching the light drain from the sky. By the next morning, the texts had turned from reminders into guilt, and from guilt into threats. By the end of the week, I'd received 6 voicemails, 11 texts, and 2 emails with subject lines like, "Can we talk and family should stick together?" My mother finally called. Her voice was tight with restraint, like she was trying to sound warm without dropping the script. Sweetheart, this isn't like you. You've always been so respectful. Your brother's counting on you. Isla's parents are formal people. We need to show unity. Unity. A word that means nothing when it's only summoned for guests. I'm not going, I said simply. Delaney, don't be difficult. I'm not. I'm being honest. She sighed, frustrated. It's just one dinner. You don't have to stay long. Smile, say a few words, and then you can disappear again if that's what you want. You mean like I already have? Another silence. Then she hung up. Callum tried next. His tone was different, less forceful, more confused. Look, I don't know what's going on between you and Mom and Dad, but can't you just show up? For me, I almost felt something. Almost. But I remembered all the years he looked away while I was overlooked. No, I said. Not this time. The next day, my father called again. His voice had shed the pretense. If you don't show up to this wedding, he said, you're out of the will. I let the silence stretch just long enough to give him hope I was weighing it. Then I said calmly, clearly, I make more money than all of you combined. I could hear him inhale like he'd been slapped. You're bluffing. If you'd ever asked about my life, I said you'd know I'm not. He didn't respond. He just hung up. That was the last call I took. From that point on, I watched the messages come in like waves, first urgent, then desperate, then angry again. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I opened a new tab on my laptop and clicked back to the real estate listing I'd saved the week before. It was still there. 3 bedrooms, cedar siding, room for a garden. Grandma Edith called the next morning just as the sky turned pink behind the trees. She never waited for permission, never checked if I was free. She just called, and I always answered. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, voice steady with that mix of gentleness and knowing. "How's the air up there today?" "Cool and quiet," I said. "Like I like it." We talked for a few minutes about the lavender I'd planted on the balcony, about the deer that sometimes wandered behind the apartment. Then she paused. "They asked me to call you?" She said, not apologizing, just stating the fact. "I figured," I said. "Let me guess. Convince me to come back and play the part." "They didn't use those words, but yes," she said. "Your mother's been pacing. Your father's in a mood. They're panicking. Because they miss me." She hesitated just long enough, because Isla's parents are watching and asking questions. I laughed under my breath. Of course. My value had finally surfaced tied neatly to someone else's expectations. "I'm not going, Grandma," I know she said. I wouldn't either. That's why I always picked up. She didn't sugarcoat things. She didn't make excuses for them or pretend the past hadn't happened. She remembered my birthdays, sent me postcards from her little trips, asked about my job, and actually listened to the answers. She was the only one who ever looked directly at me and saw more than what I could offer. "I just wanted you to hear it from someone honest," she said. "Not because I think you owe them anything." "Thank you," I said. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said, and I meant it. Really. I stayed on the phone with her until the tea in my mug went cold. She asked about the house I was looking at and whether I planned to paint the walls or leave them plain. We talked about furniture and fig trees and things that had nothing to do with obligation. By the time we said goodbye, the sun was warming the windows, and I had already opened the mortgage calculator again. The wedding day came and went without me. I spent the morning on a trail just outside Lithia Park, weaving between tall trees and early spring wildflowers. The silence out there wasn't empty, it was earned. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder what was happening on the other side of the country. I breathed deeply, let the wind move around me, and kept walking. When I got home that evening, there was a missed call from Grandma Edith. I called her back before even taking off my boots. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "You enjoying your mountain air every second?" She exhaled slowly. "Well, the wedding happened." I waited. "It was tense," she said. "The kind of tension that looks polite on the outside but makes your neck stiff just sitting in the same room. Sounds familiar?" She chuckled. "Your parents did their best to keep it together, but Mira couldn't stop fidgeting. Your father barely spoke. Isla's mother kept glancing around like she was waiting for someone." "Me?" "Yes." "And when she realized you weren't coming, she asked why." I closed my eyes, let the moment land. "What did they say?" "They tried different versions. First, they said you were sick. Then, that work had called you away. Then, that you were traveling for some conference. All lies. Isla's mother knew it. You could see it in her face. She pressed harder. Asked why you hadn't been at the engagement party either. Asked why she only found out you existed a few weeks ago. And, apparently, she had a private conversation with your mother after the rehearsal dinner. No one knows exactly what was said, but your mother came out of it pale and quiet. I think she got read like a book." I almost smiled. "What about Callum?" He looked distracted all night, kept checking the door, never smiled long. Isla looked upset through most of the ceremony. I don't think she bought the family portrait they were trying to paint. I sat down at the kitchen table, letting that sink in. Not out of malice, just at the kind of satisfaction that comes from truth finally catching up to the noise. "They still think this is about a dinner party," I said. "I know," she replied. "But Isla's parents saw it Delaney. The imbalance, the omissions, the damage." We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and scrolled through new listings. The house I'd been eyeing was still available. I bookmarked it again just in case. A week after the wedding, Grandma Edith called again. I was in the middle of unpacking a box labeled kitchen, fragile, when the phone lit up with her name. "They're still talking about it," she said without needing to explain what it was. "Isla's parents, yes. They've asked Callum directly now. Why you weren't involved. Why no one mentioned you until the last minute? Why you've disappeared? And what did he say? He tried to downplay it at first, but I think even he's starting to realize it's not just going away. Isla's mother doesn't like being lied to. I set down a stack of plates and leaned against the counter. Is the marriage already cracking? There's tension, the kind that doesn't fade with a honeymoon. I didn't feel glee. I didn't want things to fall apart for him. I just felt still, like watching ripples in a pond after dropping a single stone. They've started asking around, Grandma said. Your parents, wanting to know who might have your new number, your address. They even asked me again. You didn't tell them, right? Of course not. I told them if you wanted to talk to them, you would. I breathed out slowly. Thank you. They're nervous, she continued. Not just about you, about what Isla's parents might do, what they might say, what this might mean for Callum's future. They're worried about damage control, I said. Not about me. Yes, she said quietly, but they're starting to realize this doesn't just disappear. The way they treated you, it left marks. I looked around the small kitchen sunlight on the counters, new dish towels folded by the sink, a window above the stove that overlooked a row of pines. This wasn't just where I lived, it was mine. They're the ones who disappeared, I said. They just didn't notice until someone else did. She didn't reply right away, but I could hear the pride in her silence, the kind that never had to be spoken out loud. That night, I finished unpacking the kitchen and lit a candle by the sink. The house already felt like home. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My father's blocky, careful print, like he thought neatness could cover history. I stood at the mailbox for a long moment, the envelope heavy despite its weight. I didn't bring it inside. I walked straight to the fire pit in the backyard, struck a match, and dropped it in. The paper curled inward, blackened, then disappeared into ash. I already knew how it ended. The next morning, I signed the final paperwork for the house. My name on every line, no co-signer, no conditions. Just mine. Jasper and Ray texted about flights for next month. They wanted to see the place and help me plant the first flowers. I'd already cleared a corner of the yard for tomatoes and thyme. Later that evening, I registered for a graduate course in digital forensics. Not because I needed it, just because I could. I changed my phone number the same week. Only a handful of people got the new one. Edith, my boss, Jasper, Ray. That was enough. No more surprise calls. No more texts asking for favors disguised as obligations. No more family dinners where my name was an afterthought. The house was quiet. Not lonely, just honest. 6 months later, my backyard was filled with voices and the smell of roasted corn and grilled peaches. Jasper was manning the grill like it was a science experiment. Ray balanced a pitcher of sangria in one hand and a stack of mismatched cups in the other. The folding table overflowed with potluck dishes, quiche sesame noodles, a suspicious-looking casserole someone insisted was a family recipe. A neighbor's golden retriever flopped at my feet. Across the yard, my coworker's daughter Marin tugged at my sleeve and handed me a plastic bracelet she'd made from string. "You're my aunt now," she said solemnly. "But the fun kind." "I'll take that," I said, slipping it on. Later, as twilight settled in, someone I barely knew from the next street over asked, "Do you have family back east?" I didn't hesitate, not anymore. There was a beat of quiet, and then I smiled, gesturing to the table where Jasper was laughing so hard he'd spilled lemonade on his shirt, where Ray was dancing barefoot to a playlist I didn't even know I had. "But I have this," and I meant it. When everyone had left and the yard was quiet again, I gathered the plates, folded the chairs, and stood at the edge of the garden with the string bracelet still on my wrist. Fireflies blinked near the fence. My house glowed softly behind me. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was mine.